I'm going to start out just with an introduction to me. So some of you may have met me over the years. My name is Dalton Carter. I'm currently the technical support manager here with Censis, and I've been with Censis for about 7.5 years now. I actually started on the support desk, handling all of the orders, and then moved over to professional services for a while, where I did implementations and assisted with projects on that end. And then after doing that and traveling for about 3.5 to 4 years, I came back over to the IT side and am now in my technical support manager role. So I've been around the company and I've traveled, been to a lot of the sites, and I may have met you over the years. But today we're going to be going over just the administrative fundamentals. So these are the basics of what a manager needs within CensiTrac. So for our agenda, we're going to start with users. So that'd be managing users. Then we're going to go on to access levels. Then we'll move on to competencies and we'll end it off in messages. And just so everyone knows,
No one said nothing to me. I don't know.
as you have questions throughout the presentation, feel free to put them in the chat. And then we're going to have a Q&A session towards the end. So starting with the users module, this module is just utilized for managing everyone in your staff and what they have access to within CensiTrac, because you choose which access levels they have. And in order to get to that module, you would navigate to administration and then users. So first off, with adding in a brand new user, and you're already in the users module, so you have to start by navigating to that users module. Up at the top right, you'll see a button that says add user, and you just select that button and this field would appear. So I added a note because if any of you are using Active Directory, this will look a little bit different. Active Directory doesn't have a password option here. So for what you're supposed to put into these fields, your user ID is what you're actually using to log in. So whenever that user goes to log into CensiTrac, that's what they're going to be typing in. Their username is their specific name. I know that can be a little confusing because sometimes you have to log into things using your username. The password, whenever you're giving a user their first password, I always suggest making it something very generic. That way you can remember it. So whenever they go to log in the first time, you can have them change their own password. Or if you have it set up, it'll automatically make them change their password whenever they log in for that first time. You also have to choose their access level. So that's which access they have, and we'll get into access levels and how to create and modify them a little bit later in the presentation. And then you can also put in their email. Currently that field is optional and it's only there really for personal record keeping. Once you have that information in, you would click save. So for editing existing users, you're going to have a very similar fields, but you'd start by navigating back to that users module, the administration users, and the bar at the top, you can search for a user's name or their ID. So with the search bars within CensiTrac, usually you can search for any field that displays there. You don't have to search for a specific field. A lot of people think that you have to search for their user ID, but if I were to type in just Dalton, it would show my name and then my user ID as well. So once you've found the user that you want to edit, you're going to select the action button, which is the 3 lines with the arrow. And then you would select edit user. And it would pull up fields that look like this. So here you could edit any of their information. And the big one here is if you had a user forget their password, you can assign them a new password as needed. So you would be able to go in and you can even modify their user ID if you wanted to here. But the big one is just putting in a new password. Once again, I would suggest something generic, just since it's the first time they're going to be logging in with that new password, and then have them change it once they've logged in. You'll also see the status here. You have statuses of active, suspended, or deleted. Suspended means they currently don't have access to CensiTrac, and delete them would delete them from the system. And then our access levels, again, we'll go into that starting on the next slide. But that's how you choose a specific access level from the users panel. There are multiple ways to choose access levels, but this is the most commonly used one. And then lastly, we have that email address, which is just for your personal record keeping. So now we'll go on ahead and go into access levels. So access levels is utilized for assigning different levels of access to your employees depending on where they're at. So if you have someone in the OR, I really doubt they're going to need to see container assembly most of the time. So you can remove access from them even seeing that button. That way they don't have the option to go in and select it. That way you're able to limit confusion and possible user error. You can get to this module specifically by going to administration and then access levels. So I'm going to start out by creating a completely blank access level here. So to create an access level, once you're under administration access levels, you're going to select the manage access levels button. There you'll see the list shown here underneath. And that's your list of your current access. And you're going to select add access level. Then you just enter your new access level name, whether it be CS Tech, a super user of some kind, or OR Tech. Those are ones we commonly see. And then you're going to select save. As soon as you select save, you're going to have a screen pop up that looks like this, where it kind of looks like you're under administration or under a specific screen within CensiTrac already. But you'll notice all of these kind of look grayed out. So if they are grayed out, that means anyone associated with that access level has no access to even see those buttons. As soon as you click them, you'll notice that they turn to a darker blue color. And at that point, they would have access to them. But a little bit more about the interface before we go into that. So from the access levels module, after you've created one, you'll see this select access level at the top. The one that you created is going to be the one that's selected automatically. But if you wanted to edit a specific one, you can choose that drop down and then choose one of your existing ones as well. And you'll also notice at the top left, there are three options: screens, permissions, and users. So that's really important because screens is going to refer to what buttons that anyone in this access has the option to see. Permissions is referring to what they can do within those buttons once they have access to them. So whenever you're editing screens, it'll look like this again, and you'll notice that this darker blue was where we actually selected items, and they do have access to that. But right now, this access level does not have access to the loaners module since it's grayed out. And I added an important note here, as there isn't a save button on this page. And most sites, if you go in to edit your access levels, you immediately are taken to the CS manager role. So you're editing your access. So something we've seen a lot is where you'll go in, go to administration access levels, and it looks a lot like the main menu whenever you first get there. So then someone would select administration access levels again. And at that point,
Hey, Dalton, I think your audio cut out for a second.
what was the last thing you heard?
Oh,
You were talking about how the CS manager can sometimes edit their own access level and how you see that often.
Yes, it looks like the main menu whenever you first go to edit an access level. And most of the time it defaults to the CS manager access, which means you're editing your own access. So people will immediately select administration and then access levels again. And it will gray out access levels like the loaners page here. And then they'll return to the main menu. And they will be able, or they will be locked out from access levels there. So be very careful while you're on this page. Make sure that you don't gray out things that you do need access to. When you're in permissions, similarly to whenever you're under the screens, you'll notice that the blue highlighted options, so all of them except for the assembly comments here, are going to be ones that they do have access to. And in this scenario, it's just ones that aren't highlighted rather than grayed out. They do not have access to. So they would not currently have access to container assembly comments. Once you've modified your access levels to the way you want them, there are two ways you can assign them. One was the one we mentioned earlier with the users. So you'd go into the user specifically and then select edit user and assign their access level. The other option is once you've created that access level, you have that third tab, the users tab. So whenever you're under this users tab, you're only able to see the user's ID. You can't see their name. But you would select the users from the right-hand side. So on the right-hand side of the screen, it would show you a list of the user IDs. You select which ones you want to move. And then in the middle, you'll have a button that says Move Selected Users. And you can move all of them to that access level at once. So you could do it as a batch rather than doing it individually for a specific user. The next thing that we're going to go into is competencies. So the competency module is utilized for training your employees, and it can be on any number of different topics, and you can set them to expire in months, years, just for whatever your compliance may be. So for creating a new competency, we're going to start by going into the administration panel again, and then going to competency. And then you'll select add competency up there on the top right. Once you've selected add competency, you'll see this little box appear below. And at that point, we're going to start putting in our details. So we're going to put in the title of it. So if it's to reprocess a specific scope, we're going to put that in. Then we're going to put in a brief description. Just this is what this competency is designed to train our employee on. You'll only see that facility drop down if you are using multiple facilities. So if you have multi-facility logic on your server, otherwise it'll just be your facility. And then you have a status of active or inactive. Active being, we want them to start doing this competency right now. Normally I suggest starting it with as an inactive competency. Then once you created it completely, then you go back and change it to active. And then also you'll set that expires in period. So how many days, how many years will it expire in? And you can also set who it's required for. And that's by the access level. So that access level that we just set up, any users who are assigned to it, I'm going to say they now have to take this competency. And you can select multiple access levels here. So it doesn't have to be just one. Once you put in that basic information, we're going to start putting in some elements, so elements to be evaluated. And this would be specific steps that you want observed. And you want to be able to say this user has passed or not. So I just put some generic items here. Every time you start typing into one of these lines, a new line automatically appears below. So if I wanted to add another line, I would simply start typing here. And I would type a fifth step in. And at that point, a sixth line would appear where I could type in another one if I wanted. And along with these steps, you want to get as in-depth as you can, because you can use these as compliance documents. So if you have someone who goes in and observes, or someone else who goes in and approves, you want to make sure that they know exactly what they're looking for. And you can also realign these. So if you were to click into these gray boxes on the left-hand side next to the steps, you can actually drag and drop these. So you can drag and drop them to realign them in case you added in something that needs to be step 2 later on. That way you don't have to delete everyone and then start from step 2 again. And then lastly, with creating competency, you want to make sure you set what it's controlling access to. Now that could include trays specifically, sterilizers, and that's specific sterilizers. So if you wanted to just say this SteriAd, so my technicians can't process anything through this stare ad until they've done this competency, you can do that. Scopes or scope types, so that means a specific scope or all bronchoscopes. Containers, or even a complete service of container. And you can control access to decontam, sterilization, scope processing, load indicators. And you start by selecting from this controls access to. So right in the middle of there, if you click where it says controls access, you'll get a drop down that will show you decontam, sterilization, container assembly, and all of your options. Depending on which option you choose, your search for drop down will be filled in. So if I were to choose scope processing as my control access to, it's only going to give me the options for scope types and scopes under the search for asset. So once I would select scope types, then I could search in underneath it for a bronchoscope and select that, and it would add it to the list of what we're controlling access to. And it can be multiple. So if you had multiple different scope types you wanted this competency to be a part of, you could add that in. As far as editing a competency, so once you've created the competency originally, at any time you can come back just by navigating to administration and then competency. Then you're going to select the action button next to the competency that you want to edit. So you would select edit competency or delete if you wanted to delete it. And then it would go back to what we're controlling access to and our elements. And you could just select save and close again once you've edited what you want to change. As far as observing a competency, so we've created a competency and we've assigned it to these employees. You can have someone observe that isn't necessarily a manager, and that can actually be set up under access levels. So that's one of the permissions under access levels is can observe a competency. And there's also one for can approve a competency. The person who's observing needs to have access to that competency button. So they also will need screens. So they'll have to be able to see the competency. They go into competency and then they'll select by employee. So that'll give them a list of all of the employees who have competencies assigned to them. So then they could observe after that. And you would select the arrow next to the person that you're observing. Then you're going to select observe. And at that point, it's going to bring up this observation screen. And just so everyone knows, I see the messages, and at the end, we're going to have a Q&A session. So I'm going to go into those. So when you're observing a competency, it brings up this observation. So here I'm observing James Smith on his dental instrumentation. First, you're going to select which method was being used to evaluate the competency, and at least one has to be selected, but you can do multiple. So if you did a test and an observation, you can select both there. Then you're going to say whether they passed or failed, or if it's currently in process. And then also next to each element, you'll notice there's a kind of blank check or a blank box there. You can fill in information in those results. Now I've seen that vary from site to site that I've been at. Some places may do yes or no. Some people do an out of 10 system, so they would do 7 out of 10 or 8 out of 10, however they did. And some people just put an X in there that yes, it's fine. And then at the bottom, you would add any notes specifically that you want the person approving it and the person who's signing it to see at the end. All right, as far as approving a competency, so observing and approving a competency can be done by the same person. This is also an access level permission. So they would have to have permissions to approve a competency. But they can go into administration, competencies, and then they're going to select by employee again. They'll select the arrow next to the person's name, then the action button again. And since this employee has now been observed, you're going to have approve enter as an option now. So the first time we looked at this, it only had observe as an option. But now that they've been observed by someone, someone else can come in and approve it, or even that same person if they have access to it. So they're going to select approve. And then it's going to pull up this screen, which looks very similar to my observation screen, but you'll notice here they have all of the information filled in. So it shows when it's going to expire, and the person approving can modify that date. It shows they passed, and then their results for each of these elements was 10 out of 10. And then for the notes, you can see that they passed all tests, and it was Linda who put that in as a part of the observation. And this one was actually approved already. And it was approved by Mary. And you can see that she put in good work in the notes. But at the bottom, you would select approve or reject. If you reject it, that just means the employee can take the competency again or be observed again. And if you approve it, anything that competency was controlling access to, they can now go into again. Because if they were to, so if I controlled access to scope types in scope processing with a competency, and my employee went in and said, all right, I'm going to process this bronchoscope, even though I haven't done the competency yet. As soon as they tried to scan it into CensiTrac, it would say, stop, competency required. You have to go through your competency before it will let you do this. And then the last thing I have is signing a competency. So with signing a competency, the only person that can do this is the person who actually took the competency. So this would mean all of your users would have access to competencies, and they would have to log in and navigate to administration, competency, and then they would find the competency that they were recently approved on, select the action button to the left of it, and then they're going to select sign. That would actually pull up the full approval screen just like we had seen before. But at the bottom, instead of seeing approve or reject, they see this little acknowledgement, by clicking sign, I acknowledge I've reviewed and understand it. And they can sign it or print it. And then once they click sign, it'll actually fill in this last box under administration competency to show when it was signed as well.
Hey, Dalton, I think you went back on mute again. Nope, still on mute.
Can you hear me?
There we go. Beautiful.
Yeah, apparently my headphone cuts off automatically if it doesn't hear anything for 20 minutes.
Oh,
But once they've signed their competency, that is a virtual signature. And they actually have that acknowledgement at that point, the competency can be considered complete. And looks like we're going to have a little bit extra time here for Q&A, Grace.
that's totally fine.
So we'll go into Q&A. I know I have some chat messages already, so I'll go ahead and pull those up.
Yeah, if we want to start at the top, we've had some. So Sam Harrison, who is a clinical educator, has been responding to a few, but we can start at the top. One from Marty that I believe was already answered, but once deleted, will they show up in reports and in records?
Yes. Yes. Even if things are deleted, they will always show up in reports.
Yeah. And that's what Rory and Derek confirm. That's awesome. If you lock yourself out, who's the best point of contact to get you back in?
So if you have locked yourself out of access levels, you should contact the support desk. So that would be 615-468-8000 and option 1, or it's also on the bottom of your screen anytime you're in CensiTrac.
Nice. And Billy, we are seeing your comments on PD, so we'll send that over to our team. That's excellent. Courtney, and this looks to be answered by Sam, but I think just to touch on it, if you don't add an access level group to the competency required for section, does it give others a hard stop? And Sam had replied, you have to choose at least one access level group.
You would have to choose at least one, but it wouldn't give people who are not associated to that group a hard stop. It would only give the ones who are associated to the group a hard stop.
Then we have, can you print off the competency after they are completed to add to employee files?
Yes, you can, and that's if you go into the approval screen. So if you were to go back to administration competencies, you can go to approve, and then there's a print button on the bottom right there.
And Billy, just to confirm, we are seeing your comments, and we're going to pass that along to PD because those are great feedback.
I have one that was sent as a direct message after
Good.
that.
Yeah.
This is from Derek. Instead of entering all of the data, can you upload current ones? So we would have to have them in a specific format, but we are able to upload them at this point.
We have a few more, and I have some that were shared privately as well. From Adele, competency and multi-site logic CensiTrac servers, is it best practice to have a system-wide competency on one topic, or to make that same competency for just an individual hospital, even if it's technically the same?
I would say best practice would be to try and get us to a system-wide consistent competency.
And just
I know some sites that won't work for some sites, but as a best practice, if I have 5 sites and we're all working under the same company, and we'd probably just want to be consistent with all of our training.
Yeah, that's a good point. Does the system send you alerts? Example, if person A, OBS will send it to person B, who is allowed to approve, then on to tech to sign. So kind of like an approval process.
It does not send alerts. So there is a pending approval filter within competencies, so they could use that to see what needs to be approved still. But there is not a way to send an automated alert anytime one of those is completed.
Okay. That's a good process improvement. Is there something in the works to attach pictures to competencies?
I would have to check with our development team on that piece.
Yeah. From Stephanie, you stated the digital copy is always stored on CensiTrac. What happens when the staff then has the same competency completed a year later? Does it replace the competency so you can no longer see the original one, such as being able to see past one or past years?
It does replace the original one.
So would you advise?
I'd advise that if you wanted to keep the older one printed out, and then we can put an enhancement request in to be able to see older ones.
That's a good thought. A few more. Does Census have a competency specifically for CensiTrac training for staff?
Not currently.
Okay.
And for what format they have to be in order to upload, we have to get with our data team. So you would have to speak with your client manager, and then there would be data work in order to get them into a template, which would then be uploaded into CensiTrac.
Hey, okay, so we had some folks join late. Dalton, if you wouldn't mind summarizing, where can they find competencies in CensiTrac?
You would have to go into the administration module,
Okay.
and then you should see a competency module there. So just from the main menu, administration, and then competency.
Beautiful. So I have a few more questions. Can I have a time sequence to force a user to change their password, like every 90 days? And does that mean that they need to have a new CensiTrac badge barcode created citing that new password?
They wouldn't have to have a new badge, but you can set the password to change automatically. So that'd be under administration settings and then password policies.
And Dalton, based on your experience, is 90 days usually best practice, or what have you seen on site?
It typically depends on hospital security. So hospital security manages whatever their current time frame is. So what you utilize with computers is typically what would be used for CensiTrac as well.
Okay. Is it mandatory to include the employee email address when creating a new user? How is the user email address used in CensiTrac?
It's not mandatory. It's completely optional, and it's just for record keeping.
Okay. What happens if I change an access level that takes away the ability to change an access level?
At that point, you would have to go, or you'd have to call into the support desk, and it would have to be changed from the back end on our side.
Gotcha. Follow up to that, are access levels specific to a facility when on a multi-site logic CensiTrac server?
Could you repeat that? Sorry.
Yeah. Are access levels specific to a facility when on a multi-site logic CensiTrac server?
Access levels? No.
Okay.
The competencies can be access levels. No, but you can, what I've seen other sites do is they'll create a separate access level for the different facilities. So they'll essentially copy what the defaults are, and they'll rename them with a facility prefix so they know whose is whose.
Two more questions I'm seeing on competency. Can I have access control by both a function and an asset, or is it one or the other?
So it is by both, because you have to choose what function you're controlling access to with it first, and then at that point you would choose the asset.
Okay. And then I'm seeing the last question here, follow up to competency in multi-site. Is there a way to copy a competency to create it for a new hospital on the same server? Same way like copying a container definition, perhaps?
Give me 1 second. I am not sure off the top of my head.
Yeah. And for everyone on the call, we're going to be putting the CE certificate link and keyword, and that keyword today is administrative. So I'm going to add that right now while Dalton is finding the answer. If there are any more questions, feel free to add them to the chat. The keyword is administrative. And for all the folks that didn't make it to last month's sessions, all on-demand sessions are held behind the census portal. I can send that link as well. You will need a portal login, which you can either reach out to support or marketing at Census or your client manager, and we can get that set up for you. Let me drop that link in the chat as well. And all sessions this week will be live and updated by the end of this week. Dalton, I know you're looking for that answer. There was another question that came in, so let me know when you're ready for that as well.
Oh, you can go ahead. I'll just continue looking while I'm...
Okay. So this question, is there a notification that alerts managers that competencies are due?
No, there's not a notification. You would have to log into administration competency, and then there is a option for the specific name is expiring training.
So the follow-up to that, so managers just have to check expiring training periodically.
Correct.
Okay.
And then as a follow-up to earlier, that there was a question about the whenever you do a new competency.
Mhm.
To further expand on that, they can see a competency record report. So if you go to reports, there's a general competency record that'll show previous years, but it won't be the full observation. So it won't be the full page like what you would see if you're observing and approving a new competency, but it would show that they passed it at this time and it was signed at this time, and it would give a method of how it was observed. So tests, demonstration, observation.
Okay. And are you, we can follow up. Oh,
Yeah, I had to open up my demo real quick to verify this one.
there's a follow-up to your statement there. You can do an exemption report, competency report, expiry report. I can give you almost all. Yes.
Yes. So you could do it's an exception report to show you what's expiring over the next 7 days, and you could use that kind of like a notification, but it's not going to be like a message through CensiTrac. It would just be sending you an email on a daily, weekly basis. Thank you for bringing that up. And then Nia, yes, these will be recorded and available later.
Okay. Dalton, do you see any other questions that we may have missed?
I don't think I got any other direct ones. I'm just making sure that I didn't get any other direct messages that were.
Fair enough. And for everyone on the call, the CE, I'll put it back at the bottom or at the top, depending on. And yes, all sessions are on demand.
There is not a way to copy a competency. There is to copy an access level, but not a competency.
Well, I would say we got some great questions. Also, feedback on the product, which is amazing. Thank you to everyone who made the session today. Again, all sessions are on demand, held behind the Census portal. You can reach out to our support desk, your client manager, or to our marketing team, and we'll get you set up. Dalton, any final words before we close out for our AM session today?
I appreciate everybody joining, and thank you for your time today.